If your market is crowded, more content won't save you, but more of you will. Today, my guest Stephen Mostrom and I break down what it actually means to outright AI as a small business, keeping your human voice, sharpening what makes you distinct, and using AI in a way that supports your thinking instead of replacing it. Because the goal isn't to publish faster or more. The goal is to be remembered and trusted when the buyer is comparing options. Are you struggling to be seen and heard in the age of AI? This one's for you. Stay tuned. This is Strategy Talks. I will be right back.
Let's strategize together. Let's hear it from an expert. Join the conversation, it's informative and free. You and me, let's talk some strategy. Now here's your host, Dorien Morin-van Dam.
Hello, everyone. After a 2-week hiatus of Strategy Talks, we are back live. I'm here with a special guest, and I'm very excited to talk about outwriting AI. If you are too, make sure you stay tuned. I want to welcome all of you. You might be watching this on LinkedIn, on Facebook, or on YouTube, whether you're watching this live or on the replay. We welcome you and we encourage you to ask questions because remember, we are live. Now, if you're listening to Strategy Talks as a listener as on the podcast, I also want to welcome you because we value your input and your listening as well. So before we do anything else, I want to ask you, if you're here live, let us know where you tuned in from. I should be able to pull up the comments. I would love to know where you're tuning in from. And then I'm going to bring onto the stage with me, Stephen Mostrom. How are you, Stephen?
I'm doing great, Dorien. How are you?
I am great. It's nice. There's already some people watching. We're live on Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube. And we're going to talk about outwriting AI. Now, that's kind of ambitious. So for people meeting you for the first time, Stephen, what's the difference between good writing and copy that sells, especially in like some of these more industries where trust matters, like tech, finance, healthcare? What is the difference there?
Yeah, I love that word trust, Doreen, because I think that is both what we all need to be striving for and also, frankly, what's lacking in a lot of content online. And so you'll see if you're scrolling LinkedIn or subscribing to a newsletter or reading a blog post, you'll see that there is a lot of solid writing out there, writing that would pass maybe your English professor's 101 scale and get you a B plus or an A minus or something like that, because the periods are in the right place, the sentences have a flow and a structure to them. But that doesn't mean that it's something that is going to build trust. It doesn't mean it's something that's going to grab attention, and it doesn't mean that it's delivering a large amount of value. And because there are so many words online, and so many now, thanks to AI, pretty well constructed words, that is no longer the differentiator. The differentiator isn't, can I write a sentence that my English professor would say this works? The differentiator is, can I say something that really matters to my audience? And in order to do that, you have to do a couple of things, which we'll talk about today. But I think chief amongst those is you really have to understand who you're talking to, and you have to present them with something that they can't find somewhere else. A unique angle, unique data point, unique perspective or action item that they can take away. And if you're not doing that, then you sort of risk falling into that, that sea of sameness that I'm sure a lot of us are hearing about, this sort of bucket of generic content. So when I think about the difference between good writing, the periods in the right place, we crossed our T's, we dotted our I's, right? It looks nice, versus the copy that actually stands out. I think about a lot of those sort of intangible elements or psychological elements.
All right. I love that answer. So I think it sort of answered my second question, but what's the real advantage then humans have, right? So where do small teams waste that opportunity? Is that in the prompting? Is that in the, like you said, prompt, especially if you're going to use AI, prompting AI to use, to talk to the right people? Or is it something else? Is it them not sitting back and doing editing, or them, or humans not sitting back and doing the thinking before they do the prompting? Where do you see some of this misalignment? Because that's really what it is. Almost all of us are going to be using AI.
Yes.
It makes us faster, better, it makes us more productive, right? It's just, it is what it is. But where is that disconnect? Where are people going wrong? If you're gonna, be able to answer that.
Yeah, absolutely. Doreen, one of the ways that I like to help folks with this is to actually take this bucket of writing, which I think we often talk about. Oh, I'm doing writing, but actually, in fact, if you break it down, you are often doing multiple different steps within that writing process. And in my opinion, AI is really efficient and useful in certain steps, and in other steps not so much, and it actually detracts from your writing. And so the first step or stage that is involved in the writing process is ideation, coming up with what you're going to talk about, what you're going to write about, things like that. I think there a really strong partnership between the human brain and AI can be really valuable. On the human side, we are very good at coming up with something unique, original. We're also very good at tapping into the emotional side of things in a way that AI isn't. On the AI side, we now have access to tons of information about our target market, audience, things like that. What do they care about? What are they talking about on Reddit or Facebook or LinkedIn or things like that? And so bringing those two together, I think, is really powerful in the ideation stage. Then we move into like the writing stage. This is where we're actually putting, words on paper. And I think there writing is, again, this sort of like partnership. Let's leverage the humanity to make sure that we are saying something meaningful and using human words and not feeling like that bot speak. I'm sure everybody knows what I'm talking about when is, sort of this like flat robotic, words that come from ChatGPT or Claude or whatever tool you're using. And it's pretty universal. And it's because AI doesn't have that feeling. But at the same time, AI can help you, figure out that word that you're thinking of. Like, I know there's a word that would be perfect here, but I just can't remember it. AI, can you give me like 10 options and I'll pick the one that, best fits here or something like that. And so having that partnership. Next is moving into the editing phase. And this, I think AI does an excellent job at. It's very good at seeing patterns. It's very good at fixing grammatical errors. I use tools like Grammarly all the time. That is all really valuable. And then the final stage is rewriting. If you need to go through some sort of rewriting process because something didn't hit the mark, or you're repurposing or something along those lines, then again, AI is really good at taking something you already have locked in and extrapolating it, repurposing it. But if you need to do a functional rewrite, maybe somebody came to you and said, hey, like this part just doesn't feel like it's working. Chapter 3 doesn't feel like chapter 1, or something like that. Then that's where I think you have to kind of go back to your human intuition and trust, that what you're talking about, and begin to dive into that rework. So when I talk to folks about AI application, really I try to say, what's AI good at and what are humans good at, and let's make sure that we are applying each of those at the optimal stage to Outwrite AI. That's really the whole formula is, where are we applying AI? Where are we applying humanity? And if we blend those two together, then we will outperform anybody who's just leaning too heavily on one or the other, either writing from scratch without using AI, losing that efficiency, or leaning way too hard into AI and losing their humanity.
I love that answer. Oh, that is so good. And I love how you broke it down too, because I do a lot of batch writing, or, I have to say not writing, batch content creation.
Yes.
So I'll do like edit 30 videos, or I'll clip this, and I'll, set up like 6 blog posts I'm going to write, and I have the titles and the outlines, but I'm not actually writing. But yeah, having the process, knowing where AI can be really helpful, and then knowing where you need to sit back and think and, think about angles and stuff and strategy, and then prompt AI. I love the way you brought that. So if you're watching, if you're listening, if that resonates with you, let us know. Give us a thumbs up if you're here on LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook. I definitely love that answer, and I think that makes a lot of sense. where do you think the breakdown is for small teams
Mm.
as far as not outwriting AI, right? So sounding robotic. Is it not having the knowledge, not having the resources, and having to, not the proper training? Um, is it that they don't understand their writing? Is what do you see is kind of like the breakdown whether you step in or whether what you see on LinkedIn,
Mhm.
when a small team is not using AI, right? Where do you think the breakdown is?
Yeah, I think there are honestly a couple, and we've seen those play out over the last couple of years, especially as everybody now has their favorite LLM in their pocket. Probably the one that springs to mind the most is this idea that, okay, if I'm a small team, I look at some of my competitors. Often they're much larger, and they have a robust content ecosystem. They are publishing a lot. They already have a back catalog of a lot of stuff. Well, I need to catch up to them. So what's the quickest way for me to do that is to just churn out a whole bunch of stuff using AI. And so there are stories of, companies in 90 days churning out 160 articles, on their website, and trying to use that to generate SEO, trying to use that to reach their audience. But when you move at that speed and you're leaning that heavily on AI, you are losing voice. You are losing that sort of attention to detail because you don't have time for it. And you are potentially putting out stuff that either you wouldn't want to stand behind or is frankly just very generic and boring. And when I think of AI content, especially with light prompting or minimal prompting and really no human input, then the question is, what differentiates that from something anybody else could get? What is it unique about you grabbing something from AI versus if I just sat and grabbed something from AI? It's a commodity at this point.
Right.
You can all grab it. And so then if teams are feeling that rush and they grab the commodity and put it out there, and then they're surprised when they're undifferentiated in the market, when people who read that, one, if people even bother to read it, but if they do read it, then they go, well, how is this person different than anything else? How is this company different than anything else? And so what we really try to focus on is what's unique about you and your company, and how does that speak directly to what your ICP, your ideal client profile, what they care about. And in many cases, having a much smaller amount of content, but that's hyper targeted, is actually a much better way to go. When I think about our agency, and it's just me and my wife, it's a 2-person agency, but we're often competing with much larger agencies in the content space. But when I think about our content, we both write on LinkedIn. We have a couple of longer pieces if folks want to see that. And we've got writing samples that we've done for clients. But that's largely it, because we invest a lot of time and effort into those individual pieces. And they are uniquely us. They have our fingerprints all over them, rather than if we just went to AI and said, hey, give me like 160 articles on, content strategy and content writing. Like, yeah, it'll give it to you and you can put it up on a website. But, that doesn't mean that you're actually going to move the needle on anything. And so I would really encourage teams to think not necessarily about how much or production, or, there's a really great writer on LinkedIn named Brendan Hufford, who talks about this idea of checkbox marketing. Are you just sort of checking the box because it seems like the thing you're supposed to do? Or is your marketing actually, connecting, resonating, driving pipeline, driving conversations, relationships, those kind of things? And in a lot of cases, this sort of mass volume play just isn't going to get you there.
Yeah. So it really comes back to strategy, which is, we're talking about AI, in a way, AI search, right? How people are using AI, because if you want your human content or your AI enhanced human content to be found online, whether that's on LinkedIn or a blog post, you need to be smart and strategic about how you produce these pieces of content. Now, I was going to ask you specifically about maybe a LinkedIn post, like what that looks like or the process, and then also blogging. I am a content strategist, so I am heavily involved with most of my clients creating blog articles, and a lot has changed with AI on the outline of a blog article, what it's supposed to look like, because you want to in a way serve up to AI. You want to you want to write for the human, but you also
Mhm.
want to write because you want to be picked up by the AI. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting conversation I think that we could have. But let's start out with LinkedIn. You just mentioned that you and Donna have, certain pieces that uniquely yours really speak to, your ICP. Is that what you recommend a small team do, that they invest more time in the pieces that they produce than, say, be consistently posting 3 times a week and get stuff out there?
Yeah, I do think that you mentioned strategy. I do think you have to consider the pros and cons of every angle. So there is data that shows that publishing 3 times a week or more on LinkedIn does expand your reach. And so that is a factor. But if what your version of publishing 3 times a week is simply copying and pasting something from AI that is undifferentiated and doesn't have any of your fingerprints on it or anything unique for your audience, it doesn't matter if you're getting a bump in impressions and a bump in engagement if that's not actually resonating and it's not accomplishing
Right.
anything.
That makes
You know,
sense. Yeah.
I think one of the traps is this idea that, oh, if I just sort of the if we build it, they will come, mentality. If I just publish, people will start noticing me. Maybe in the very early days of LinkedIn or other, the internet, fill in the blank, you could get away with just being present as a differentiator and a competitive advantage. But in reality, I mean, there are so many people publishing on LinkedIn, so many blogs. I did this sort of back of the napkin calculation for a conference I was speaking at, and I went and researched how much content is produced every single day on the internet. And then I said, if you were human and you tried to read all of this content, how long would it take you? And the answer was in hundreds of years to read a single day's worth of content that is produced. So there are, which it's mind blowing.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, there are an unlimited variety of alternatives to what you are posting. And so what is it that makes somebody choose your piece of content over all these other options, not to mention the other things they could do with their time, like, I don't know, hanging out with their kids or watching a show on Netflix or, something else. Like, you're competing with all those factors. And so that's where I think about whenever I'm writing a post. Like, what is it about this post that would make somebody literally stop in the middle of their day and go, oh, I really appreciate reading this, rather than just scroll, maybe hit the like button because I know who that person is or something like that. And so in my opinion, that starts with understanding what it is that you're actually giving in terms of content value. When I write on LinkedIn, there are essentially 2 or 3 things that I'm always trying to give in terms of value. I'm either trying to give somebody a behind the scenes look at our agency and how we run our agency, because we're, I think, somewhat unique in a husband-wife team and a small agency. And, we do navigate a lot of this AI, but human writing as well. So I try to talk about that. I try to talk about things that I'm learning that I think might be valuable to other people. So my post today was about, Claude, and how Claude called me out on something that I was doing on my LinkedIn strategy that could have been better. And I wrote up, exactly how I put my stuff into Claude and what it gave me and what I was doing about it. And hopefully somebody reads that and it's valuable for them. And then the third thing is I talk a lot about LinkedIn and how to stand out and how to use that as a platform to really grow. I talk about founder-led thought leadership and things like that. So every single time I post, I want it to be something that resonates either on a personal level or on a business level with the person that's reading it. And if I suspect that the person reading it just thinks of it as another drop in the content bucket, then I failed. I haven't done the job that I need to do. And so by extension, I think for a lot of small, teams that are looking to maximize, I think LinkedIn is a great platform. I think thought leadership is a tremendous area, especially with all the AI stuff that's out there, to really differentiate and stand out.
Yeah. But that means that it has to be your thoughts, not AI's
Yes.
thoughts or AI's regurgitated, information. So, that is great. I wanted to, as you were talking about, hundreds of years of reading in one day, I read at the end of 2025, I read a statistic, and I can't cite the source, but it said something to the effect of, in 2026, we will 10x the content that is right now available on the internet. So all those years, 2025 and before, whenever the internet started, 19 something, 18, I don't know, 19, whenever it started, put all of that content, all those years together. And in 2026, we're going to 10x that. Yeah. That was the moment I was like, oh, wow. How are we going to stand out in a sea with our blogs, with our content, with our social media, with our marketing materials, right? And so, one of the things that I want to ask you about or want to talk about is like one of the unique ways to create content is to kind of create content that AI can't create, right? So whether that be charts or case studies that are uniquely to your own clients, think about, and that's a kind of a takeaway for somebody who's watching, who's listening, create content that is not easily available, but that's valuable to your ICP. So yeah, case studies is of course is one, because it's just information that you worked with a client, they have an outcome and you're going to put it all together. And that's not something that's available anywhere else. And then, charts and calculators and things like that. If you put that in blog articles, those are also things that AI can't really create. So people need to click on your content to get there. So we talked about LinkedIn. How about, does your agency create and write blog articles, Stephen?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. So I'm sure it has changed, either the process or the output or what a blog article looks like. So for example, I'll just name it. All the blog articles that I'm creating now, at the top of every article now, I put the key takeaways, which is not something I used to do. But I know that helps AI, figure out what this article is about. So the key takeaways are at the top. At the bottom, I might have, additional questions or frequently asked questions you have about the same topic. So those are just two things. I want to make sure that all the articles now have the correct date. Sometimes things weren't dated, and we know now with AI, it's very important because AI is looking for the latest and greatest, right? What are some other things that have really made a switch for you, or you felt like you needed to update now that AI search is a big component to driving web traffic for clients?
Yeah, I think that's a really critical topic, because I think the age of blog posts living on their own and just being an asset that's on your website, I mean, those days are over, because your website is now being scraped by every AI tool out there, and then it's being indexed. And so if you aren't thinking of it in terms of how it's being presented on a broader scale, if you're just thinking, oh, this is just sitting on my website, that's sort of an outdated mental way of viewing your blog. And so there are a couple of things that I really think about. One is, and I wish I could cite this article, but I remember looking at some of the early feedback from Google's ranking algorithm on AI generated content. And the short answer was Google could tell. Google could tell when something was just pure AI regurgitation, and it tended to downrank it. And so what that signaled to me was, one, AI voice is going to be a detriment if you are trying to put together a blog post. And that goes back to, again, some of the things that I've seen around, teams that throw together 160 articles in 90 days, throw them on their website. Maybe they get a slight bump in SEO, but then if you actually go and track what happens after that, they tend to get really, really de-indexed. Like it's crazy. And so sure, maybe you are getting that, a 30-day window of things look good. And then all of a sudden you're just sort of DOA when it comes to search. And so I try to think of, still at the end of the day, you are talking to a human on the other end. And the really good algorithms understand that. So Google has a lot of stuff on their website talking about how really what they're looking for when they're indexing is value, humanity, stories, these different elements that are going to deliver for the person reading. And so, I remember like early blog posts was very educational in nature. Like, here, let me, give you sort of definitions of, sometimes very basic stuff. Like, here's a definition of a banking account, and here's a definition of interest and APR and things like that. Like, we've written some posts like that in the past, and I think before AI, that might have made sense. Your audience needed help finding that kind of information. Now they would just go to ChatGPT and say, like, what's an interest rate?
Yeah.
And I mean, they were probably doing that with Google before. And so it's how are you taking that content and elevating it? So one, I suggest to our clients, don't write something if your audience already knows it or could very easily find that information. Let's spend our time on something that they can't find.
Right.
Or if we're going to write something that is more educational in nature, let's get into the weeds. Let's talk about specific examples from within the business. So I was just writing a blog post the other day, and it was more educational in nature. It was helping the reader understand changes in a certain industry and what that looked like. And what I chose to do was I chose to go and look at the case studies that we had for that company and actually sprinkle those case studies in. I took about 3 or 4 of them and I dropped them in at key moments as proof points of what we were talking about. So it wasn't just educational. Here, let me give you some, details and, a little bit of talk about how you could implement this. Then we would actually say, here's how a company in your vertical did it, and here were the outcomes. And then I would link to that specific case study. So from a reader perspective, they're going, okay, here, they're talking, they're giving me some advice. Oh, here's an example, and here it actually works. Wow, let's go read that case study and get the proof, the proof, point. And then when AI is reading it, it's a similar dynamic where it's looking through and it's going, okay, here's some educational content. Oh, here's some like actual value add. This is something unique that nobody else has.
Right.
And then it gets elevated. So again, we were talking earlier about what are those things that you can create or that you already have in your asset library that AI can't replicate. And then how are you elevating that? And even in something like a blog post, you can be talking about something that might be a little bit more on the generic side, but you can actually weave in those those unique elements that only you have, and use that to elevate an existing piece of content. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, no. I totally agree. I think that, bringing that uniqueness to the foreground is important. I was just in a meeting the other day with an agency I work for, and we were talking about content, and the designer says, yeah, there's a lot of talk in the designer world right now. And this is not, of course, about writing, but she said about, people explicitly saying this was created without AI, right? So people want that pride of this was designed without AI tools. This was designed by a creative brain, a human brain. And there's been quite a bit of pushback and from AI usage. And, there's 2 sides. I also have clients who want me to create content with AI, including images and videos. And, I still think that the human content wins. But sometimes there are reasons to use, more AI in your content. And if that includes writing for a specific purpose, then maybe it's okay for a little bit. But on the overall strategy, you've got to make sure you watch your data and you got to make sure it lands with the right people. So I think it's important. I do have another question, like crowded markets. Say you're new, you're a startup. What's one like writing move that somebody can make that instantly makes a brand more memorable without being gimmicky? Like, is there like a thing that you can say, well, you got to do this or you got to do that? I mean, there might be somebody watching or listening and like, well, we're brand new. We're going to use AI. We don't have a big budget. We don't know what to do. What is one thing that they could do that would make them stand out?
Yeah, I love talking about crowded markets because I actually think that the idea of like an oversaturated market is kind of a misnomer. And you can find these really amazing examples. So one of my favorites is, are you familiar with Liquid Death?
Yeah.
The water company?
Yeah.
I love Liquid Death as a marketing example because they came into hands down the most boring and oversaturated market in the world. I mean, how many water bottle brands are there? And it's water. There's literally nothing special about it. It's just water. Maybe it's sparkling water. I don't know.
It's in a can though. It's in a can. That's the difference.
but they did a couple of things like that. They put it in a can, and then their marketing is awesome. It's so counter to everything else that was in the market before. If you go into the water bottle section of your local grocery store, it's Dasani, it's Fiji, it's like, oh, look at these like nice streams and everything. And then Liquid Death comes along and says, here, we have a melting skull on our bottle. And like their slogan is like, don't worry, it's safe. You can drink our water. Like it's hilarious. And it's so counter to what's going on. And they've managed to build like a $4 or $5 billion brand off of a commodity, off of water, And so for anybody who's in a crowded market, my big question to you is like, what is it that's unique and differentiated about you? And so for companies like us that are in the service industry, like it's about your people. And so Donna and I on LinkedIn, and when we're talking with prospects and when we're networking at conferences, a lot of it is like, hey, here's who we are. Here's our viewpoint on content. Here's our viewpoint on life. Like, and like, do you want to work with us or do you want to work with somebody else at a bigger agency? And the people who want to work with us generally want to work with us because they agree with how we view content and they like who we are as people and they like working with us. And so those can be differentiators, even in a saturated market. Like we operate in a hyper saturated market. There are a lot of content writers out there.
Right.
And then there are things that are uniquely us, like we come from business backgrounds, we bring in that level of experience. We've worked with a lot of big clients, stuff like that. We definitely play that up as well. But I do think that to sort of bring this back to what can you do today is talk about what you care about in your industry. So even if there are 500 competitors, why did you choose to start that business? Usually it's something personal. Usually it's something like, this matters to me. I love this element. Like for me, I love when writing opens up a conversation, when it creates a relationship. When I put out a piece of writing and somebody goes, I really needed that today. And then they DM me and we start chatting. That is like my favorite thing. And so that's why I spend all day writing. And so for you, my big question for you is like, why do you spend all day doing the thing that you're doing? Talk about that. Like, and that's why I think for small teams, I'm a huge proponent of something like LinkedIn as a starter platform for content, because it's a lower barrier to entry. Like you're just, the pieces are shorter and it's very experimental. You can try something, and if it doesn't work, next day you try something different. But get on there and talk about you and why you care about what you're doing, and share your story, share your founder story, share the story of, struggles that you've had, things like that. I'll give you one quick example. We had a SaaS CEO in the finance space that we ghost wrote for on LinkedIn last year. And she came, and initially her thought process was, okay, I'm going to talk to finance people about finance stuff, about these sort of like very tactical how-tos on finance. And she tried that for a little bit, and we were like, okay, let's test it out, see how it goes. And it was okay. It was fine. But then she started sprinkling in a few of these posts about leadership in the finance space, and specifically her point of view on what it takes to be a leader. And she also started like pulling back some of the curtains on what actually happens in finance, and start sharing these stories that I think most people know from their experience, but don't hear leaders talk about very often. And her LinkedIn took off. I mean, at the end of the year, she had something like 20,000 new followers. She was getting 12 million impressions over the year. But more importantly, she was building relationships and having like leads come in and things like that. And it was because she was really leaning into what was uniquely her, having been a finance leader. And she was willing to just be really honest and transparent about what that looked like. And that was just one channel. LinkedIn was just one channel. And once she had built that up, then she started expanding that same approach to other channels and doing a bunch of other stuff. But to start, she got on LinkedIn, started talking about her brand and what she cared about, and this, leadership challenge in finance. And so I think that's really a powerful way for folks to get started, is jump on LinkedIn and start talking about the things that you care about.
That is a great example, Stephen. I love that. Thank you for sharing that with us, because I think there is a hesitation, and if you're watching, listening, you might have that, of feeling that you might be oversharing, or you might be, and a lot of people don't understand the difference between sharing private things and personal things. And, I've talked about this before. I think sharing personal things is fine. Sharing private things is not. So like you might want to share your private life, but you can talk about your personal struggles, right? So, and it might look like something like, privately you're diagnosed with the disease. So you might not want to talk about that because that's private, or maybe your spouse is. But personally, you can say, hey, I'm a caregiver, or
Mhm.
I care for somebody, and that's why, I've had to step back from my business. And do you have something like that in your life? So you're sharing the personal, but not the private. And I think that when you get that right, you can really connect with people. So I love that example. I know we're way over time, but I've got one more question that I
Mhm.
think is really important. And then I'm going to ask you how people can connect with you. Where do you see AI causing the most damage for small businesses and small teams right now?
Mm,
Like where is the damage that they're doing that they're not seeing, and what should they do today to stop?
yeah. I think the damage is feeling like you're doing something when you're actually not. I think
Mm,
that's the big risk that I see with AI. And you can see this play out in a lot of different ways. And so we already talked about, if I jump into AI and I have it write me a post that's completely undifferentiated and I post it on LinkedIn, I might feel like I'm doing something, but that's not really going to drive the kind of conversations that I want to have. If I'm DMing somebody on LinkedIn to try and start up a sales conversation or build a relationship or something like that, but I'm simply copying and pasting what AI gave me, and it's flat and it's boring and it doesn't have any of my personality or anything like that, then again, it's going to feel like, oh, I sent a couple DMs today. I did a good job. I wrote a couple blog posts today and put them on my website. Those kind of things. I think it can feel like you're making progress, but in fact you're not. And in even a more sort of intrusive way, I'm not sure if you've seen, but there is some early research coming out, and Wall Street Journal had a really great article on this, on how overuse of AI actually diminishes our human skills over time. And so if you are outsourcing writing to something like Claude or ChatGPT, and you're doing that every single day instead of writing it yourself, your writing skills will deteriorate. They'll
mm,
go down every single day. And so then when you need to lean on them, or if you decide to change pace, that skill's gone.
mm,
And you can build it back up, but it's going to take time and effort and all of that. Whereas if you stay in it, you grow that skill. Every single time I hand write something, whether it's a LinkedIn DM or a blog post or whatever, like I'm building that muscle, that internal
mm,
muscle. And so even if I'm writing a post that doesn't blow up and go gangbusters, I'm at least building that mental muscle. Whereas if I'm just copying and pasting from AI, not only is that post probably not going to work, but I've also just outsourced my skill building to AI, and I'm hurting myself in the process. And
mm,
so my big question would be, for AI usage, like how is this benefiting my business? How is this benefiting me as a business owner? And if I don't have a clear answer for that, then I might need to take a harder look in the mirror to see, am I just outsourcing things that I probably should be doing because it's easier, or if
mm.
maybe it feels more efficient, but is that really what is going to move the needle for the business? And in my experience, most of the time, the answer is no. Most of the time it is more of a shortcut or an excuse to, not do some of the hard things. And believe me, I fall into this trap just as much as anyone else. So I'm sort of calling myself out too.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
oh, I really should do that, but AI can do it in 3 seconds, and then maybe I'll, just do that.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and so
Yeah, I was gonna say I really tried hard when I think about something that I have to write, to at least write an outline, to at least write my
yeah,
thoughts, to at least say, this is kind of what I have in mind. Help me figure out how this is gonna look good. Like even with a LinkedIn post, I might write, like 10 lines and say, I'm struggling with the first part, or, I think these
mhm,
words are not right. But I really, really, really try to practice that writing all the
mhm,
time before I go to AI to enhance it. And we're not even talking about, for me, English is my second language. So it's been so wonderful to be like, I know there's a word, but I don't remember the word. And then you go to AI and it'll serve me the word and 10 others, as you said before.
yeah,
So that's been an amazing journey for me, at least. But
mhm.
yeah, it's no excuse not to write. So I love that. Stephen, I think we could talk another hour. I love this
Yeah.
conversation, but we're going to wrap it up. People that don't know you, or people that do know you and want to connect with you, where should they go? I'm assuming it's LinkedIn.
Yes, absolutely. Please come hang out with me on LinkedIn, and seriously, like reach out if there's anything I can help folks with in the content space. I talk a lot about content, but if there's specific questions, please don't hesitate to DM me on LinkedIn. And just a quick little plug. I know we talked a lot about Outwrite AI, and my wife and I are working on a sort of white paper that condenses a lot of our thoughts on this topic. And so if you do come follow me on LinkedIn soon, we will have that white paper available for free download for anybody who wants to see it. So just put that little plug out there.
That's awesome. Yes. And I'll make sure that the link is in the show notes. So then if you want to connect with Stephen, it's very easy. It'll be a one click here, Stephen, on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for being with me today, Stephen. Thank you so much for those of you who stayed to the end to watch Strategy Talks on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And for those of you who stayed all the way to the end listening to Strategy Talks, don't forget, we have a new community on School. If you want to join us, whether you're a guest, a listener, a watcher, or somebody who hosts their own podcast and is curious about what we do, come join us on School. And I'll be back next week with another episode of Strategy Talks. Bye, everybody.